Live. Hit record. Might have to approve that too, and we will start. Maybe it doesn't ask you for that.
It doesn't.
Since it's live streaming, it doesn't need you to agree to all of that. So let's go to speaker here. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Johnson, and I'm here with my good friend Eric Garland. Monica Nixon may be joining us briefly. Eric, I'm going to give you the podium for a second. Introduce yourself to our erstwhile audience.
My name is Eric Garland, and I am an intelligence analyst.
Beautiful. And bass player. Don't forget the bass player part.
Yeah. I mean, I'm multi-partially talented. So actually, bass is the only thing I've done longer professionally than intelligence analysis. That is true. So actually, I'm a mouthy bassist who collects information on people.
I love it.
And also an educator of intelligence analysts as well. Something I take seriously. So
beautiful. Well, Eric's with me today for our topic series to re-release the Close the Distance program. And for background, my name is Eric Johnson. I'm the founder and chairman of a company called Aurora WDC, Aurora Worldwide Development Corporation, which I founded in February of 1995 to do something that would provide me with income. And it turned out that thing was strategic market and competitive intelligence because, hey, why not? And the business of the private commercial intelligence analyst, where Eric and I make our living, is a very, very diverse one. And so a few years ago, I began putting together some pieces that would allow me to elevate for clients the yield potential of the products that Aurora was producing for them. And today we refer to that as superiority analysis. And this whole meta-analytical flow of superiority begins with defining your macro environment. And so this holiday time period, Eric and Monica have been helping me introduce our audience here to the concepts of the macro environmental control factors that you have to cope with and not control. And these are abbreviated as STEEPLED. STEEPLED is short for social, technological, economic, ecological, legal, which is today's topic. I forgot political, which was yesterday. Ethical and demographic. And those 8 domains are a good way to organize and sort the uncontrollables in your macro environment that will ultimately be most important to your future as an actor. And it doesn't matter if you're a commercial actor, an individual, an NGO, a government, a region. These are designed to help you understand and articulate what those control factors might be that are contingent upon your future. The phases after this, by the way, are optimality. Optimality is how you calibrate and recalibrate your offer and offering to that macro environment so that you are in alignment with the criteria the market will reward with share. There again, doesn't matter if you're a business or a government or a region. All of the same superiority criteria apply in optimality. And then the final stage, and actually I'm having delivered today, Eric, by the way, my first pair of virtual reality headsets, the Oculus, whatever it is, number 2. And those are arriving so that we can run our very first Aurora war game in virtual reality in January. Every January, and you, I think, know this because I think you've participated in a couple over the years. Every January, we do a retreat somewhere as a company, and that retreat always involves a war game simulation. The simulation phase of superiority is where you test your conjecture against the market and its stakeholders and how those stakeholders might respond to your offer. Specifically, stakeholders who can either help or hinder you in some way. And wargaming traditionally is done against competitors who might intervene in the deployment of your strategy and cause that strategy to suffer or even fail. And ultimately, the objective of a war game or any simulation really is to deliver a sense of confidence that you've covered all your bases. Most of the time, in the absence of some form of simulation, that confidence is false. It is a false confidence. And Eric and I have talked many times over the years about palliative strategy, strategy that makes you feel better as you're dying, makes you more comfortable during your demise. So anyway, Eric, I'll stop talking for a second, but that's where Close the Distance is going to live in the next, months and years, hopefully going forward, is we can understand the macro environment. We can optimize our response to that macro environment to reward the market with the benefit and value of our offers so that they can reward us with their share and the economic benefits that come along with that share. And then finally, the simulation stage where you test your investment grade conjectures against those who might help and hinder you. So at the end of that process, you've got a story about the future that's held in high regard by its co-authors. So I'm glad you're joining us today. Eric, any thoughts to kick off legal?
Sure. Want to do the background of what is the root of all law? Since I like to go back to Genesis. There is no law without violence. Something, I have a master's degree in international affairs, and one of the things that we study right up front is what is a nation state. And a nation state is defined by several factors. I won't go into all of them, but you got a border, you got culture, and you have a thing that is known as law, but that law is dependent on the government having a monopoly on violence. And any place where you exist, where the government does not have a monopoly on violence, it's not a state. Those are the technical terms I learned, and the more we explored them, I thought that's exactly right. Which gets you to why there is no such thing as international law, because there's no country that has a monopoly on violence over any other without it being called war. Now, what's a monopoly on violence in your local area? I mean, it sounds scary, but when you think about it, it's, you have to enforce a law. And we either enforce these things by taking people or taking stuff, both of which are crimes in other matters. So if I decide that I don't like something you've done, and it's against a personal rule of mine, and I go and I put you in handcuffs and in the back of a car and take you someplace, that's known as kidnapping. I don't have the right to do that. But a government that we duly elect, and not all governments are as legitimate as others for these definitions. Not all legal systems are as valid as others, and some of them can change in validity, which is the trends we're going to be talking about here. But, if you have a government that decides who gets arrested or what property gets seized, then you've got a system of law. That still needs to be tuned up with lots of, the rules themselves, the statutes and the legislation that underlies that, the government that creates those laws. But at the end of the day, you got to have a government that they're the only ones that can decide to take people or their stuff. And we go from there. Then we move on to legitimacy. And I think we could skip ahead and go, well, how are we doing on the rule of law? And, first of all, I think it's a really interesting question for us because we got so far into globalization in terms of economics. People didn't really stop to think that there is no international law. There are some treaties that are signed, and we have we have legal agreements with other nations, but there is no monopoly on violence in another country. So we're dependent on them acting diplomatically. Say an extradition treaty. If somebody breaks a law here and we send you, and they're in your country, you use your monopoly on violence, you take that person, put them on a plane, extradite them here to face their charges. But that's all diplomatic. There is no way to enforce that unless you invade the territory and put your monopoly on violence on their territory, which is war. We have globalized our supply chain without a real understanding of who we've been doing business with. And that business can be a supply chain of physical goods or financial. And I'll tell you, people find out that the rule of law doesn't work the same every place, and that complicates matters for us. For example, there are a lot of people who go to work in Dubai who are from the West and are used to a certain level legal treatment, let's say. Um, and it's only when something goes wrong when they're working over there, because you have a little Westerners who've been well paid and everything's going great. And let's say somebody claims that there's a debt owed. They can be hauled into court where, unless you're an Arabic speaker, you're not going to understand the proceeding. You don't necessarily have the right to an attorney, and they might throw you in jail. And this has happened to a bunch of surprised Westerners that, they may not have the right to free speech or competent counsel or due process of law the way we think of it in the United States. And it's like, yes, you're in a different place that is not governed by the same laws, and that has, that has consequences. And for us in the United States, we have a certain legal system, and it's got its pros and cons compared to other places. I would say we got a couple of major problems. One, you have a very polluted system for making laws, both at the local, state, and national level, where we have special interest groups, and this has been a trope for a long time, but we have a problem where we have very, very unique special interest groups that are writing laws for whatever their business needs or social needs are, and they're making that known through money. We have there are some investigations going on right now, and even some prosecutions about that money is coming from some foreign places, not within the United States, where we don't agree generally that they have a right to make law. And yet they are, right down to, who's that chap there? Rudy Giuliani worked with a couple of guys, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, and turns out they were acting as conduits. They were in a straw donor scheme to put contributions into the pockets of both the candidates for federal and state office. Which candidates has not been revealed with regards to the Parnas, Fruman, Correa prosecution. They've all been convicted, by the way, and nevertheless, who they funneled money to is not entirely transparent yet. But there you have a corruption, and it's funny. It was particularly aimed, I'm told, at the emerging legislation around legal marijuana dispensaries. So, there we have a little problem with the, law comes when our government that has a monopoly on violence writes the laws down because we had an election. Well, if we have somebody adulterating that by coming in and leaning on that election, primarily through money, though there are other ways to execute that, I suppose, then the kind of laws that get made they don't represent us, and then we're kind of in a pickle. I mean, we're not even sure in that case where the foreign money came from. There's another similar case with a guy named Gilbert Chagouri from Nigeria. He's a Lebanese-Nigerian billionaire, and he's been funneling money into our elections since the Clinton administration. When he was working for the Sani Abacha regime, that was very, very regressive, and that dude has spread money out to Democrats and Republicans alike, and that's the subject of an ongoing investigation and prosecution as well. So, it's kind of a thing, apparently. Oh, and then there was the 2016 election. We heard about the NRA funneling Russian money in. Ooh. So, forget the execution of laws and the rule of law and the enforcement. We've got, here in the United States, we got a problem about making laws, since it seems like we're not the citizens aren't the only people who get to communicate to our legislators on what laws we want. And that's a sticky wicket. We have laws against that. But we also have recently put in, through some Supreme Court cases, McCutcheon and Citizens United, the general sense that we should have less transparency and not more transparency of the money.
Yeah, let me hop in on that, because how unique is our system in the world where we allow, maybe not knowingly, but at what point is it a failed state if foreign interference in legislative matters is not enforced, as is, I think you laid out very clearly in your examples? It's not foreign interference in legislative matters, at least at the federal level, and probably at the state, House in Missouri, at least, where you probably put most of your attention. At what point is it a failed state?
That's a good question. I mean, if you take a nation like Belarus, which is, borders Russia, of course, and, its current dictator, Lukashenko, doesn't really respect the international norms for an election being valid. And Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya is the legitimate president of the country. And really, there's just a huge amount of influence from the Vladimir Putin regime. And the same has gone for the last, at least, definitely the two regimes before Zelensky in Ukraine right now, where you had an inordinate amount of money and influence of a variety of sorts. Some of it foreign interference through intelligence services, and some of it through American political consultants like Republican Paul Manafort, Democrat Tad Devine, Democrat Tony Podesta, Republican Vin Weber, all working for the Party of Regions in the Ukrainian election of 2014, I think. Or was it 2010? Somewhere in there.
But it was earlier.
Viktor Yanukovych, who was a solidly pro-Russian candidate. And so they were infiltrated with our political guys. And, it is, but let's take Belarus, which has got, a leader that is considered unelected by the majority of countries out there, versus the current president of Ukraine. Is it a failed state? Pretty well. I mean, I don't know. They're being sanctioned. They're being shut off from institutions. And there's a lot of lawless stuff going on there, human trafficking and money laundering and all sorts of things. So is it a failed state since it's being used as a cat's paw by a larger empire? I mean, I'd say yes.
So the way I would almost define that is that there is no regulation on the executive power in that jurisdiction, territory. And as a result, the executive acts with impunity. They don't really care what the judiciary or legislative branches of government are doing or think about it, or they've puppeteered it. They've packed the court, so to speak, with their own apparatchiks who will decide legal matters on their behalf because they are authoritarians. To invoke a social and political trend we discussed a few days ago.
Well, if the executive, legislative, and judicial branch of any country, and that's a system that that we really solidified as far as democracy is concerned, if those are not fundamentally opposed in some manner, tradition if not law, I think then corruption results. And in some of the places like Ukraine, the prosecutor's been on the take, and the judges are assumed to be a rubber stamp, and thus the executive is kind of a group effort where they're all sort of the same cartel. So I think what defines a legitimate system that is based on the rule of law is some adversarial nature where it's not all one team. Otherwise, that's a junta, right? We've in some places we've got a lot of that in the United States, in pockets, where there's you can get it on the local level, where the judges, prosecutors, police, and legislators are a little bit the same people. We have a situation in St. Louis here where the prosecutor, as soon as a new prosecutor came in, by the name of Wesley Bell, replaced a guy named Bob McCulloch, who was the prosecutor during Ferguson. A lot of people might remember him. Strangely enough, when Mr. Bell was duly elected as county prosecutor, many of the prosecutors under him all of a sudden wanted to join the police union. It was like, I mean, we've all seen Law and Order. There's 2 parts of every episode, you know. It's like the police to go check this out, and then they turn it over to the prosecutors. They're not the same people, and They don't always agree on things. Well, here it's like all of a sudden, whoop, we want to unionize with them. Well, why? You know, what are you going to talk about? How are you guys? Kind of don't have the same job, do you? Do you? You don't have the same job, do you? Which might be. You're not trying to create the color of law, are you? An appearance that there's a legal system, but in fact, there's really no tension between you and the other forms of authority around here. Just a harmless question from a neighbor is all.
They probably don't need collective bargaining, I'm guessing, in order to negotiate their salary and benefits like traditional unions would represent.
It's funny you mention it. I think the auditor went through here, and I think 70% of the job titles in St. Louis County's government don't have a job title or a definition for
wow.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
There's no job description for it, in other words. Duties, responsibilities.
Sorry, the title they have, but the description, so, hard to do process improvement.
Right. Yeah, and anything go.
And then you get a little lack of transparency on how people are hired and who hired them. And, we had a county executive here by the name of Steve Stanger who just got back from federal penitentiary. And part of his prosecution was giving patronage jobs out to wealthy donors. Somebody gives him $700,000. He makes sure that guy's assistant's husband gets $100 and something $1,000 gig with inchoate, fuzzy, job responsibilities. I mean, I'm not. That's not an opinion. That's from the federal prosecution charging documents, the sentencing memos, and stuff like that.
Right.
And so you go, okay. That's a local example. Our federal government is so giant and unwieldy. It's harder to get that kind of agreement and under the table kind of thing. But there are pockets of it, of course, and I think our question in a lot of places, especially on state and local levels, I think we see, when you have concentration of, say, corporations or concentrations of wealth, and you're trying to serve your constituents. If your constituents and their relative power, isn't very equal. Let's say you have a billionaire living in town that tries to buy up all the political organizations and, donates to everybody. And, who's representing whom, and, what is the real, what is the legitimacy of the executive authority going on? Well, that depends on, judges in the judiciary and, legislators and all the things we talked about. Now, I think we have some cracks there since, a couple of years back, the entire Supreme Court of West Virginia got arrested all at once. Or sorry, they got impeached all at once. 2 out of the 4 were taken down by the FBI, facing 20-year sentences.
Connected to all sorts of
racketeering, money laundering. 20-year sentences, major criminality, 2 of them.
So if that happened, then that's both. And I don't know how are they elected or appointed in West Virginia by the governor?
That I don't know.
Because that would strike me that, however it came about, I'm guessing it was a nonpartisan cabal. It was both left and right sides of the aisle working together in order to produce results for their regular.
It's funny, you had the governor, Jim Justice, who had a D marked on his name, and then he just switched it to an R. And then you had this guy, Joe Manchin, who is a U.S. senator there. And many of the Democrats are, very surprised that this elected official does not share the partisanship that they would like, and they're surprised that he can be closer to the R's when it comes to some things. Now, George Washington would have approved of that, and generally, the general bipartisan nature, and he thought political parties were dangerous and stupid. But in the case of West Virginia, you get a sense there's a concentration of wealth there. Perhaps the letter behind your name being or in front of your state or however being D or R isn't important as wealth. So just W being there.
Yeah.
So, but it's really.
So just out of curiosity, I looked up how West Virginia went for the last election. I think you've got it on your screen now.
It's pretty red. Yeah.
I don't see a blue county on there. I don't think anybody in West Virginia voted for Biden, if I'm not mistaken, by looking at that.
Well, it says 235,000. That's or 236,000. That's not no. That's not.
Oh,
no.
I mean, I don't mean nobody voted for him. I mean, no counties went his way. No counties. No, and that's often. And so here's actually
it's deep red. It's.
Yeah. So posse comitatus, and I don't know. Have we talked about posse comitatus in the past, you and me?
We haven't, but I know what it is.
All right. So this notion that the county is really the fundamental legal entity of the people who live inside that jurisdiction, that the rule of law is really based on the sheriff. And the notion that the sheriff is the chief executor of legal matters. I think that's one reason why I went to the county level. And in order to understand West Virginia, you almost have to understand the sheriffs of West Virginia. And, I'll stop this share here, but take me down that road a little bit in terms of your take on that, because that's a lot of how I sort of see not just legal matters, but political matters, is that it's the county that ultimately is how power is expressed more regularly over the citizens who live under that power.
Well, I mean, very often the sheriff, I believe, executes on the local level what we understand the U.S. Marshals to do for the federal level, which is they're the enforcement of legal orders. For example, if you're found to be in contempt of a court, then the person that's going to put you in handcuffs is going to be the sheriff. So they're the ones that exercise the monopoly of violence in an area. We also have police, which have an investigative function, and to my knowledge, I don't think the sheriffs do. I think they may have they may have an enforcement function, and if they see you doing something wrong, they're able, or you report a crime has happened, or you're being stalked or menaced, that the sheriffs can make some of that happen. But if you file a writ of replevin, for example, you're going to have where you say somebody has taken my private property and is holding it. This is not larceny. This is not theft. This is, let's say you turn your car into a car repair shop and they don't give it back to you. What's the sheriff that executes the writ of replevin? Mm-hmm. And the police, which only very often exist in a larger metropolitan area, and it's funny you bring that up in Missouri here. Their roles are sometimes difficult to understand. And how big do you have to be to have a police department? Because the police generally investigate things, and of course it goes up to a bigger level. If it's a federal level, it's the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is a very serious organization and very different. Here we've had a situation with the police where just in the St. Louis County area, we have a St. Louis County Police, we have a St. Louis County Sheriff as well, I believe. And then you have these subdivisions, these small towns that are municipalities. They are their own cities, and they often have their own police departments for very small numbers of people, and they're primarily engaged in the enforcement of traffic violations. And
public safety mission.
That is the pretext. Of course, we've had some investigations here showing that, even showing the elected officials and other bureaucrats talking about, well, we're leaving money on the table here. Let's enforce harder because it will make more money. That's what the Department of Justice found when they investigated the city of Ferguson. That in 2010, they were taking about $1 million a year out of 17,000 citizens and whoever passed through. And in 2014, which is when a guy named Michael Brown was shot by a police officer named Darren Wilson, they were taking $3 million out. So they tripled that out of the citizenry in 3 years.
Where do I invest? That's tremendous revenue growth.
I know. And actually, something that I'd like to know this, did the schools have a boon there? Did the parks explode in greenery and play equipment for the children? Where did that go? Did it go to pay off old debts? And we started putting in some legislation at the state house level that you could only collect your town budget could only be I think 15% of revenue from traffic and other matters because it was seen as predatory. And there was a great resistance to it. But they're like, but we need that money.
Well, monopoly on violence, man. We need to generate our income, and maybe that's why all those lawyers joined the police union. Collective bargaining and whatnot.
Well, then you go to find out that the when they go that monopoly on violence needs to be mitigated by a judicial system that is saying that this is, that the law gave you that power and that when your execution of the law, that you followed other principles that are consistent with the laws of the state, but also the U.S. Constitution. And it turned out we have a very interesting system that still hasn't been really cleaned up yet, where some of the people who were acting as judges were in fact private attorneys. Neither elected really, nor appointed, and they were just serving in these smaller municipalities as the rent-a-judge. And they'd have another private attorney who was acting as the prosecutor for that town. And the town, of course, can't afford a salary, so they're taking a chunk out of that. And there's not a lot of transparency around it. And this is happening all over the place. And so you had people practicing law during the day, then at night going and prosecuting tickets. And I understood this to be substantial sums of money for individuals, for their gracious gift of their talent of having gone to law school and, working in tandem with the police. So, if you want to go a layer further there, you start talking to some of the locals, especially African-American locals, who will say, you'll pay it. And they don't keep it in a computer system. And when you come back and you get pulled over again, they'll say, you have an outstanding ticket. And you're in contempt, so we're going to throw you in jail for a couple weeks and charge you for the privilege. And they're like, but I paid it, but we didn't write it down. So now you get into constitutional matters like, is that consistent with the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment? Is that substantive due process? And, that's where I think we still have a whole bunch to do in this republic. So that if somebody exercises their monopoly on violence in that way, I think I see what you're doing here.
When I was 6 months old, the United States federal government passed the Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, otherwise known as RICO. And it led to probably the largest wave of prosecutions of organized crime in the history of the world. And ultimately, what you described there is quite a racket, I think my dad would say. And so, opinions.
Well, if you have a large number of people who, well, You've got that's chapter 96 of the Title 18. I know that one pretty well, actually. But there's also Title 42 subsections 1983 and 1985, which you start talking about. We're talking about civil rights violations of acting under the color of law, pretending where you can be held civilly liable if you acting as a judge, acting as a police officer, you were pretending to be trying to protect the public. That was the legal pretext for that. But that's color of law. Really, you were there to make some money, and I think the way that would get unwrapped would be like, who was incentivized by what? Actually, the 42 U.S. Code stuff is, did you follow due process? Did you follow the spirit of giving somebody a fair hearing in court? Were facts presented? Did the court take only facts in front of it as part of its judgment? And if no, then you'd be liable under Title 42. And 1985 under Title 42, I think that's the Ku Klux Klan Act. That's where you have conspiracies to deny people their civil rights under color of law. And a lot of those prosecutions were from police departments that were being used to block access to elections or polling stations and whatnot. That's why they called it the Ku Klux Klan Act. But those are all civil penalties, and it's an interesting trend right now. If you find out that there's people who have a knowing sort of RICO conspiracy going and are using the color of law as a pretext for that racketeering, because you can do racketeering for illegal gambling or narcotics, and there's no U.S. Constitution that you're trying to bounce off. You're not supposed to do that thing or have that stuff. And if you got a big network that spreads that money around, and you plausible deniability, I don't even know Jimmy Two Fingers. I don't even know that guy. I never met him once. What the RICO Act did was, yes, but you work in an association in fact enterprise. You might as well work for the same company, even if you don't meet. There's like people that work for Nokia or Coca-Cola or United Airlines. They never meet the CEO, but they all work in the same enterprise. They kind of made that the same deal, but for narcotics.
Yep.
But using government as a pretext for things like that, if you look more like RICO and you're acting like a government, there's Title 18, that's the criminal code, subsection 241 and 242, which is a criminal conspiracy against rights under color of law. And what's interesting is we have a new head of the Civil Rights Division, or Civil Rights Section, I forget which it is, under the Department of Justice right now, a woman named Kristen Clark, who is vigorous with the 18 U.S. Code 241s and 242s. And it's funny you mentioned the sheriff and West Virginia, because there's, I don't know if there's been a trial or a plea deal, but they decided that the local courts and the local law enforcement couldn't handle policing themselves. And so the feds stepped in against, I think it was a sheriff's deputy who has allegedly committed sexual assault on a teenager. And I think there were some other bad acts, and I think may have burned a house down that had evidence in it.
Wow.
Yeah, this is pretty heavy stuff. And so it's not a local matter, and it's not, this DOJ is not sending in the civil people to have a civil settlement over naughty, you're not following the Constitution, which is sort of what happened in the wake of Ferguson here. You had a lot of constitutional violations at Title 42. They came in, and there was a settlement. And I'm not sure how the monitoring is going, because when Trump came in, they cleared out those consent decrees over civil rights violations at the police level, I think. I'd have to check. But that was one of the things I believe Jeff Sessions did. Anyway, this Kristen Clark woman is very different. And she's like, I'm not coming back with more Title 42 for y'all. I'm coming back with Title 18. Because, and this is alleged in this case of this deputy, but just because you're wearing a badge doesn't mean you get to rape teenagers and burn houses down. Can't do it. It's a crime. And crime is made worse by the fact that you were wearing a badge, you were wearing a uniform, and you were taking the assumptions that we had that you were going to be a law-abiding, law-enforcing, law-respecting individual acting on our behalf in our group social compact here. The fact that you use that against us to be able to facilitate your bad acts makes it much worse. And so I think the minimum penalty for 241 under Title 18 is 10 years. Sorry, the maximum. It's a maximum of 10 years. But if it's anything that involves stuff like obstruction of justice or more aggravated felonies, you can move up to the 20, 30, 40 years in prison pretty easy. So just seeing that trend, I was like, that seems like it's got legs. Because how do you we don't want, we're too big a country to have a system where we have a centralized government in Washington, or like where they were planning to have it at one point, St. Louis, because it's the dead center of the country, or Chicago or whatnot. And we all know that you people from Wisconsin would never submit to Chicago's authority as a central institution. Am I wrong?
I'll tell you, if I ever set foot in the state of Illinois again, it'll be too soon. But who's counting? That's the border rivalry, I think, that exists between Wisconsin and Illinois.
By the way, we watched a delightful movie starring Neil Patrick Harris called 8-Bit Christmas, and a group of 11-year-olds in 1988, and their daring, Dirty Dozen-like plan to obtain a Nintendo Entertainment System. And it takes place in the Chicagoland area, and there is a lot of intra-Wisconsin, Illinois smack-talking while Dad's in the car driving. And I just thought of you all. So anyways, so we know that Wisconsin will never submit to Illinois for many, many reasons.
So next time we go to Door County together, you may ever even use it if we were riding in the car. If I saw an Illinois license plate and they were driving poorly, they're Illinoising me. So you heard it here first.
In New England, when you see Massachusetts, it's go back to Taxachusetts.
Right.
So we can't have. We're going to need to boil things down to the sheriff's level. That's not a bad system. There's a lot in the United States that is a really good idea. Like one man, one vote. All men are, all human beings are created equal. Great ideas. We've never done particularly well with them, and some days we've done better than others. And it's an it is not really a quote from him. It's attributed to him. Winston Churchill's apocryphal quote. We can always count on America to do the right thing after it's tried all the other options.
That's pretty good. Who actually said it?
What's that?
Who actually said it? Do you know?
It's attributed to Churchill. I don't know who said it, but we all. I've never met anyone that goes, "That's not true." We always nail our ideals. Like, have you read the Declaration of Independence and then read the rest of history? But there's a whole lot in the system that is really great, and we still want to leave judgment and discretion up to police officers on the street and judges on the bench. We can't have an expert software system, or we could try, but I think we all know if we tried to load a legal judicial legislative patch into Facebook, it wouldn't go very well on the ground. But we do have more mechanisms these days because there's so much more evidence out there of things that happen in time-space continuum. When somebody's police car showed up, what document was filed in what court, when. Did the guy pay his parking ticket or not? Like, that one's easy. And if there are systemic abuses there, we have more and more ways to be able to go to a central authority that could be looking at the systemic abuses, like the Department of Justice, which is what it was there for. The 14th Amendment created the Department of Justice because of the 13th Amendment, which was the emancipation of the slaves.
Hmm.
And the people who still lived where those slaves were not very accustomed to the idea of treating them with the due process that some had come to be used to. So, a lot of our local systems are still not bad designs, but we may just, need to do more along the lines of, well, there's a general bucket I think we can put a lot of ideas into. The American dream, but mean it.
That's really good.
The Constitution, but do it.
Yeah.
And
speaking of constitutional matters, I think we see a political trend. I'm gonna call it a legal trend, actually, for 2022 around the notion of executive orders versus legal orders. And I'll cite the New York City
legal orders as in statutes.
Legal orders as in regulation under the existing law that the residents of that jurisdiction have agreed to be compliant with, at least the ones that aren't criminals by choice. And so I'll use the vaccination mandate in New York City as a great example of this. I read a story about a woman, this was yesterday, it was on Apple News, and this woman, I think it was from Washington Post, maybe, I don't remember where the story was. That's what Apple News does, is it makes you forget about the source. But this particular woman was a musician, classically trained musician in New York City. She got the first dose of Moderna, I think, and developed tinnitus. And of course, as a musician yourself, your hearing is kind of a key part of what it is you do. So she refused to risk getting the second dose because she felt that the tinnitus was induced by a vaccine injury. And so consequentially, New York City doesn't want her anymore because she is out of compliance with an executive order, which I believe is at the state level, enforced at the local level. And you're starting to see some of this stuff pop up now where people are protesting. You're starting to see some pretty heavy-handed policing of that. And so I'll just throw that in as is this a trend in 2022 that we're, as analysts, going to have to figure out how to interpret? Because people in power like to project their power. And in particular, and I'll also cite that I think Omicron is the airborne live attenuated vaccine I've been waiting for. And consequentially, the ability to enforce a medical procedure on your population over which you've been given jurisdiction, I think the Nuremberg Law begins to become a whole lot more relevant again.
So it's funny. We actually started, if you're talking about we're going to test the legal theories of executive orders versus statute. The executive branch of any government in the United States is not supposed to create laws. However, that's only supposed to be done by the legislation or the legislature, wherever. However, in an emergency situation, we allow a temporary authority to be imposed by the executive branch, and it can be superseded by the legislative branch. Trump started a lot of this as soon as he hit the ground and started issuing executive orders out and to send a lot of people into a tizzy. And they're like, oh, they're going to outlaw long division and the color magenta and all this. And, there's some things that got thrown into chaos for a little bit, but we have a tenacious little system here. And what people found was that, a lot of those executive orders were found at the federal level to be null and void very, very quickly. My favorite was the composition of the National Security Council, where Trump immediately tried to take off the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the intelligence community from the National Security Council and put on Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon, which was, it was terrifying for some. I thought it was hilarious because I'm like, well, it's definitely bold. It's like, what are you going to talk about? With whom? The Joint Chiefs have all the tanks and bullets, and the intel people tell you all the stuff that's happening. What are you talking about? The latest Sports Illustrated? I mean, Steve Bannon going to sit in there and read you Dr. Seuss? It's the National Security Council. Might need some national security people in there somewhere.
Miss Universe, maybe? That's a thing that is... anyway.
At the water cooler, all good. But it turned out, so it was like, oh my God, it's going to be dictatorship. And I'm sitting there like, that's established by the Congress. They're not going to get that through that quick, and it's not going to sail through. But it's it's not that easy. America's set a very complicated bureaucracy, which is good because it's very resistant to dictatorships. Yeah. It makes dictatorship extremely difficult and democracy damn near unlivable. But it's better than any other system we can think of currently. Now, so Trump did a whole bunch of those executive orders, and those petered out pretty quick. I mean, even they stopped wasting their day on it because they were just running smack into federal judges who are like, nope, because they know at somewhere this is where you get the adversarial nature. That trial judge, if you go to the district level, that trial judge might want to be an appellate judge on the Circuit Court of Appeals, maybe on SCOTUS one day. And if he's doing things that can be body slammed by the appeals judges who want to be seen as having good sense of jurisprudence and might want to go to the Supreme Court, that the trial judge, and again, we're not talking about being angels here. We're talking about individual Gordon Gekko-like greed is good competition amongst individuals because the system is adversarial, because it's the executive is not the judicial branch. You may want this, dude, but I'm not giving it to you because if I do, then the appellate judge above me who wants to be on SCOTUS is going to body slam me on some very basic case law and very basic rules of civil procedure, and it's going to be a no from me, dog. And the bar in our jurisdiction is there in order to enforce the culture that makes that democracy livable. So as you I think that's what you said a few minutes ago. That's the job of the bar. It should be anyway. And it gets rid of the attorneys and judges who don't. Well, yeah. And theoretically, now you have some places where that breaks down. But in other places where, you get somebody who's really corrupt and he's going to reward corrupt people. It turns out, that you might need longer exposure to guys like Trump before the federal judges are convinced that their career path in the future won't be jeopardized by going along, with such non-jurisprudential ideas. Let's just put them that way. So now we've got, New York City's an interesting place because, all right, if we're going to take it from a partisan perspective, well, that's the Republicans, and they're trying to do this thing. Okay, well, New York's Democratic. And, the mayor of New York is exercising his executive power, which, by the way, I've talked with U.S. attorneys about this, about protecting executive power, and why not every even people that hated Trump, not every one of them would necessarily recommend going against every single thing that he wanted from the Department of Justice, because they're like, we depend on executive power in order to enforce the law. So they had to balance, like, we might have to recommend something like still defending the president against some rape, but we don't want to give up this thing down the line. This is very interesting. This is where these thoughts get very, very subtle. If you have people that are very thoughtful about them, and you have professionals of good faith who believe in democracy, they're like, I don't want to give up that. Do I want to set a precedent here that gets that precludes me and my colleagues in the future from doing what we need to do on the things that we want down the line? Again, you've got competing interests. That's the process of I mean, I think that is the process of a maturing democracy. As long as when we even if we lose our minds for a little while, or we're in a situation that's unprecedented or poorly precedented, because we had similar. What's happening now with COVID is very analogous to what happened with the Spanish influenza. Devastating for certain populations. Really tested our institutions. Required a certain. Resulted in some people taking strong executive action, and then there was a sharp response to that executive action, and people who protested against vaccines and masks. I mean, it was the exact same thing, but it was 100 years ago, so we don't remember it as much, and it didn't happen enough that our culture absorbed it. So all these things, like, we have a different president now. We have a different executive branch. And, we're revisiting some of what Trump got up to right now. And, this may, we discovered a lot of things that were based on tradition and not statute, that because we assumed no one would have, anything but the nation's general best interest at heart, and not be owing emoluments in the hundreds of millions to foreign countries. This is the first time that ever happened. Alexander Hamilton thought of it in the Federalist Papers. He's like, we do not want any American politicians taking on land and title from anywhere. We want them paid here. We want them loyal to us. So you may not be getting titles or rent monies or anything from foreign princes, because that was the system they had then. Here you have, Trump walked in. I think he might have taken the Oval Office still owing the Bank of China $200 million. That never got really reported on, and then they refinanced that. But if you take between him and the Kushners, the nest of foreign money that they owed and had been dealing with for years, we'd never seen anything like that. So now we've seen it. So okay, what do we do? And I think as long as I have learned more about the law in the past 5 years in this country, because these things got challenged, and it's like, well, wait a minute, how's that supposed to work? And even you have a lot of actually some of the best legal minds I know suffered the most because they were like, this is not how it's supposed to work. But somebody's trying it this way. So if we can, when you see some of these legal machinations go through the long grind of due process and come out the other side, which is terribly frustrating for some. There's a lot of people, there's a guy whose name rhymes with mine, Merrick Garland. They're like, we should fire Merrick Garland because the thing I wanted to happen didn't happen. It's like, I have one response to that most of the time. If you get accused of something you didn't do, will you want due process? But it's too dangerous. And look, there's a time limit on some stuff. Like, I don't think we can screw around with bad election law too much. If you have people that are very aggressive on making sure there aren't straight elections in the future, that there is clear and present danger. That I'm not mocking. But generally, it's like, don't you want to be judged on the facts? And don't you want the judge that makes that decision to have a review above her? Don't you want that? Because there are places where that doesn't happen, or they make it procedurally extremely expensive and difficult. I may have experienced a little of that, and this is something that you will want. Just like my kids are coming downstairs and want breakfast, so we're gonna have to wrap this up.
We should wrap that up. And by the way, Monica, you're sorely missed today, because I know you're reading the book about Hunter Biden's laptop right now, Laptop from Hell. Is that what it's called? Which goes into some detail about the latest round of some of that influence peddling and how it might be reflected in various places. I'm reminded of Hunter Biden's laptop because you reminded me of the Spanish flu. And the reason it's called the Spanish flu is because Spain was the least successful authoritarians to regulate their media, to not talk about it.
And it was thought of as it was going to break morale for the troops.
Exactly. Yep. Here we are 100 years later with the same narratives, as you point out, it's the same freaking thing 100 years later is happening with regard to official narratives about what reality looks like, what science looks like. And for the most skilled liar, I think I'll say this out loud, the most skilled liar I've ever seen, Dr. Anthony Fauci, to say that he is science is, of course, very polarizing in terms of what his role has been. But I think Trump wishes he would have fired the guy in hindsight, because it would have been a whole lot easier to, handle re-election without that gentleman in the middle. Anyway, Monica, you're missed, because I know you've got a whole bunch of interesting stuff you've discovered, because I'm not reading the book at the moment. So, Eric, any final words before we wrap and go take care of our children here this third day after Christmas? And we have to make sure they're fed and watered and happy and all that good stuff.
The rule of law. Hammer Eye had the right idea. Let's keep it going, team. Whoos.
And, I'll invoke King Solomon there as well. Solomon, the judge, wanted to discover who cared the most about the child that was being disputed. And ultimately, fairness is often something we sacrifice so that others might benefit as a result. And a truly wise judge will understand that in the execution and forbearance of the law on those over which she or he has been put in authority. The legal domain is one of those that we really can't control, one that we're going to have to cope with most days of the week. And even if you're an attorney, even if you're the, chief attorney of the United States, you're probably going to have to subject yourself to that system, which has been set up to keep power in check. And ultimately, that's really what the law is for, is to make sure that the powerful are accountable. And that's what I hope 2022 brings, is that we can keep those who are powerful accountable to those who've agreed to let them have dominion over their lives. So, Eric, you good to come back here and talk about ethics tomorrow?
One leads into the other. So see you tomorrow.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining Close the Distance today. My partner in crime, Eric Garland, and our missing Monica Nixon. Hopefully you're here with us tomorrow. Bid you a good day as you wind down your 2021, and we'll see you back here at 8:30 tomorrow Central Time. Bye for now.